All right, I'm going to give everybody who's listening a warning right now that it's going to be very, very hard for me to stay on track. There's so many things that we're probably going to cover in this episode that I'm just going to need my guest, Jeff Lee, and anyone listening to be patient. So without further ado, I want to do a quick intro. So Jeff is calling in on Zoom today with me from WDC. He's the VP of Public Policy and External Affairs at a fintech startup called Rhino. And Rhino is working to help address the housing affordability issue, specifically in the rental market. And Jeff can elaborate on that if I screwed that up at all. But more than that, he's also got an extensive background in public policy and politics at the state, federal, and international level. He advises and trains first-time politicians, helping them create an awareness about what they're about to enter into, this crazy world of politics. So we're going to cover a ton today, from how to help marginalized, vulnerable, voiceless people to maybe tying in politics and business. There's so many things we're going to cover that I desperately hope to stay on track, and it's going to be tough. So Jeff, thanks for being with me today. You got to help me out, man.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, it sounds like we're going to solve world peace too while we're at it today. So no problem, no pressure.
Okay. All right. Now you just work with me here. I do have a question for you. So
Sure.
Kind of help me bridge the gap between you're a business professional, you've got a technology background, you're in the startup space, but the bulk of your career has been spent on in the political arena, advising politicians. I know you've done plenty of interviews and you've written many articles on, everything from Asian hate to helping marginalized people. What do you do? I mean, there's so many things here. You got to help me get started with this conversation.
Well, first off, I mean, you only live once unless you're Buddhist or Hindu, right? So you got to make it count. For me, my life has always been on the question of where can you do the most good for the most people. That's always been my frame. And that comes from being the son of chicken farmers from Southern Georgia. My parents were boat people from Vietnam. They escaped the fall of Saigon. They escaped on a 32-foot raft. They got picked up by the Thai Navy. They were in refugee camps for 6 years. They landed in California. I was born a year after. And so that's the background I knew, is just understanding you have to live life with a sense of appreciation, because it could have went sideways very quickly. I wouldn't be able to talk to you today because I wouldn't exist. Right. And I'll give you a story that probably best represents sort of the why. When I was 8 years old, my parents had started a gardening company in a very affluent part of Orange County, California. And I learned 3 things about helping my dad mow lawns. Number 1, manual labor sucks. So if you focus on your education, ideally, you don't have to do manual labor unless that's what you want to do. But I got to tell you, my hands were not made to hedge bushes or trim things. I am terrible at it. My spouse will tell you that as well. The second thing I learned, is that people will treat you based on what they think your value is. And so, being the help, you really learn quickly how different you're treated versus as when you're a little kid playing t-ball. It's a very different experience.
Right.
And the third thing, which I think is so important, is just the people who have less always give more. And so whenever we were working in the field with my dad and his coworkers, the grandmas and grandpas and parents would come out and just give everything they had to give us lunch or dinner or whatever, because we were working such long days. That experience transcended itself beyond just working at an 8-year-old, but also when I was working overseas, when I was in Afghanistan, when I was in Washington, D.C., when I was in Sacramento. The communities that had the most challenge were always the ones with the biggest hearts, the most open, and the most committed to doing good. And it was something that continues to motivate me. And, being in tech today is partly because I believe that the private sector has a way of helping to address these systemic challenges in a way that's durable and makes sense. If you look at government today, there's a lot of challenges in how we do things. We still need the government to do things, but there are other ways to have things happen, whether it's in the civic space, whether that's with political practitioners or in the private sector. There are multiple actors that do good. There is not one monopoly on where one can do good and where one can't.
So I want to give a light tidbit on you before we jump into the politics part. You've been to all 50 states. You've been to 85 countries. You've been to every Major League Baseball park in the United States.
Very proud of that one. Very proud of that one.
I got to ask you, which one is your favorite? You don't have to.
Oh my gosh. That's like asking me which is my favorite child. You know, old Yankee Stadium is pretty special, and I say that as someone who hates the Yankees, but there's nothing like it when you walked in. I will say, Kauffman Stadium, Kansas City, something about the waterfalls, quite charming,
Yep.
quite charming, right? Camden Yards.
Yep.
When you walk in, you feel like you've gone back into time a little. I'm
Yep.
not saying Fenway and Wrigley don't, but Camden has a way of, there's a humility to Camden that I really value.
Yeah.
That's what I would tell you. I'd probably say Kauffman, Camden. Best view though, PNC Park, Pittsburgh, Three Rivers.
Yeah.
When the sun's about to come down, the game's about to start.
Yeah. And they
not a better view in the country.
And they still have an affordable ticket out in Pittsburgh, from what I understand.
Oh yeah, you can affordable ticket, and you can see the pierogies racing in the fourth inning. It's great.
That's great.
That's the way baseball should be, by the way.
I know. All right, good. So we got a little lightness, but also within that, it just goes to show that you didn't spend your life in one spot, thinking, in my neighborhood. You've been around and you've met a lot of people and you've got perspective. So let me ask you this to get started, and you got to keep me on track here.
Yeah.
So when you decided to enter into politics, advising politicians, writing about, issues, what were you hoping to accomplish? I'll just start there. What were you hoping to accomplish?
My gosh, what I was hoping to accomplish was, I think like anything, I'd been spending my entire life, trying to work on issues. And I kept finding myself on the receiving end of another decision maker. So it was always about me trying to convince the decision maker from the outside, whether I was in the nonprofit sector, whether I was advising the military when I was in Afghanistan, whether it was, trying to provide a perspective to a philanthropy. There was someone else always making the decision. And I realized, when I went to work for the governor of California in 2014, I realized I was now in the position to hear great ideas, to hear unique insights, and also to be the convener. What I wanted to be was the convener. Because I was so used to sitting in the rooms where the idea is already baked. Yep. It's a courtesy. Yep. I didn't want any of my meetings to be a courtesy. I wanted it to be a place where people felt like they could be honest with me, they could be forthcoming, and they could be true to their word. And so as a convener, that is the critical part. What you have to do is get the best ideas, or, try to best address the blind spots. And then you're advising a principal, the elected official who's been elected by the people, to make generally hard decisions that put you between a rock and a hard place. Mm-hmm. That's where I loved being, especially if it was in the technology space or responding to disasters. If it were just an easy, straightforward decision, everyone would just do it. Right. But when it comes to the issues of our time, whether it's the economy or now the space of inflation, there's some really hard decisions that have to be made. And it might not be perceived as perfect, and you might not have a consensus from everyone. And so that was what I wanted to achieve, was that sense of being in the room, helping people give us the best and brightest ideas, and then to help strategically lay out decisions that made sense for the principal, but also for the people. That's what I was trying to get at. And I will also say too, Dave, from a representation perspective, it's not exactly like there's too many Asian Americans in politics in this era of time. I mean, when I think of my mentors in my life, most of them don't look like me. And I think about the doors that were open for me, they didn't look like me. Mm-hmm. And even in the private sector, when I think of folks, I remember leaving the governor's office to interview in the private sector. A lot of folks didn't look like me either. So it was very much this recognition of, it felt like you're a little bit of alone, but mm-hmm. this reminder that there are other people out there to help you regardless of race and creed. But you needed to be there in the chair, because that's a symbol for what other people are thinking. I think of other Asian Americans who now are starting to become interested in public policy, who I get messages from strangers all the time asking for advice, or want to bounce ideas, because there's such a few connections in those spaces. So I took that also with great responsibility, that you're not just representing yourself, you're also representing a community as well.
But you must have tremendous patience and resolve to even enter into the field. You talked about ideas being baked already, so by the time you get into the meeting, as well as I, the decision's been made and everything else is just bullshit. I mean, that's really what it is.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a kabuki dance. Sometimes it is.
Yeah. So as a a white male in the privilege category, I felt those things, and I actually have the advantage, say, in that situation. How much does being a minority impact your desire to fight? Does it give you more fuel? You can only speak for you, but does it give you more fuel, or you're like, I got no chance?
Well, I mean, you have to understand. I mean, again, you have to understand my background. My parents coming from Vietnam, we were taught very early that we should just be so blessed to be here, which
Right.
means you should put your head down, work really, really hard, play by the rules, don't rock the boat, and then eventually you'll get yours. That was always the idea. But guess what? It doesn't work that way. And I'll give you an example by that, right? Like in terms of Asian standing in society. Okay. I mean, the thing that sort of set me off onto this path, right? I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, March 2020, oh my God, it's almost 2 years now. I'm traveling for my last work trip, right? I've just come out of a meeting in the governor's office in Nevada, rushing to the airport to fly to San Francisco. Woman runs up to me, in the waiting area, spits in my face, tells me to go back to where I come from. It's not the first time that's happened to me. But it is the first time it's happened in an airport, and there's a dozen people looking. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, I remember seeing the whites in their eyes, and every single person just walked away like it never happened. And so I went from being like a tech executive in a suit and tie to, a political principal for somebody, some sort of semblance of success, to being garbage. Utter garbage, that people wouldn't even acknowledge, people that wouldn't help. And I want to believe, Dave, if that stuff happened to you and me, we would roll up the sleeves, But the truth is, sometimes we don't know what to do in those situations. Yeah. And I want to give people the benefit of the doubt that they were just scared, and that they were just so overwhelmed by the circumstance that they didn't know what to do as an ally.
Right.
What do you do? And increasingly, that made me realize, if I wanted to have allies, people off the bench, off the sideline, to help me, I needed to help me. And I needed to help other people, because I had spent my entire life trying to get into the game and still not having the same amount of courage to sort of speak up as freely as I could. And that moment changed everything for me. That's when I said, you know what? I'm just going to say what I think. This is part of the deal. No more calculations. We're just diving on in, because people don't respond to maybes, ifs, and ums. Yes.
Did you at all feel let down by the advice you might have been given when you were younger, that just keep your head down, stay quiet, do your job, things will come to you? Did you feel like, wow, that was misleading? That actually got me spit at.
Yeah. I understand why my parents gave me that advice, because that's how they survived. And by the way, they paid for it later. So the second instance that happened, right, when the virus broke out, there were 3 places that got hit really hard. Yeah. 1 was Italy, 2 was New York City, and 3 was Southern Georgia, where my parents' farm is. And guess what? There was a crazy outbreak. All these people died. Well, no one's, the neighbors stopped talking to my parents after that, which was weird, because they had spent 20 years breaking bread, doing business, spending time with their kids. And eventually, sometime in August, the neighbor fessed up and said, we love spending time with you, but you're the reason why the virus is here. So my parents, who had spent their entire 40 years they've been in country, feeling like they were American, proud, very proud to be American, suddenly realizing that none of that mattered, that they were still below that, no matter what they did. Yep. And so they also realized that this whole putting your head thing down is for suckers too. So it took them a couple months after me. Right. But we're on the same page. It is the case that keeping quiet, no one can read your mind. And also, if you're trying to persuade someone, you do have to say something. And we're in a time now where courage, I think, is appreciated. And that doesn't mean it's not easy. It's really hard. But the absence of saying something in some ways is way worse.
Oh, so this applies to everything in life. Now, what you're talking about is far more. It's a deeper, heavier situation, but I find in the work I do with a company, an organization, people, whatever, professionals, most people have a real hard time speaking up for themselves, or addressing conflict, or addressing something that's not comfortable. Most of the time they lack the tools on how to engage, no matter where they come from, what they look like, they just can't, and they don't do it.
Totally.
It's agonizing for me, and that's one of the reasons I do what I do, is help them develop the tools and the confidence to address what they're not addressing, to address the unspoken tension, root out and expose the hypocrisy or whatever, without making it a confrontation.
Mhm.
And, when you were talking, I don't have any, I can't, I don't know what I would have done if I saw you get spit at. I would like to think I'd step in and do something. The only thing I can relate that to, I was in high school, and I was at there's like a beach area in my town. It's a big pond. Everybody goes and swims there. And
Mhm.
I went there one day. My buddy was a lifeguard there. We were just hanging out, and there was a group of kids, maybe a year or two older than me, from another town. They were a little bit rougher than we were. And they were rougher than we were. And I was just sitting there, and there might have been like 6 of them. And there was another kid on the beach, and I knew of him, and I knew that he had disabilities. He was not, he wasn't like everybody else. But this group of 6 zeroed in on him, and they started to surround him and throw him around. And they
Yeah.
didn't know that. They just thought he was being a wise guy. They didn't know that he had, disabilities. I'm sitting there watching, thinking, what the hell am I going to do? If I go over there, I'm going to get my ass kicked.
Yeah.
So after about 30 seconds, I said, I can't watch this anymore. I'm just gonna go for it and see what happens. I'm gonna be as nice as I can and hope that they don't kill me. So I walked over there. I walked up to this kid. I just grabbed him. I said, I just want to say this to you, and you can kick my ass after. That kid's got disabilities, and your buddies are your buddies are picking on him. And if you don't stop it, I'm gonna have to do something. I'd rather not do it.
Yeah.
They went off. They were speaking a different language, and this kid just went off on his friends and shut it down. He came up to me and apologized, and they left. And I couldn't believe it, because all I kept thinking is, I'm going to get killed right now. And somehow it worked. But I remember just being scared.
Yeah.
And but luckily it stopped the problem, and they left, and I didn't get hurt either. And so I wonder how much of it is people are afraid to get hurt. Are they afraid to be judged? What if they're with a crowd and they don't like Asians? I don't want to say anything about this guy because I don't need the judgment. Like, what do you think is going on?
Well, first, I would say this: in your experience, I think it's a great reminder that people need a little reminder to listen to their angels and not their devils. Right. So I think there is something really important about having that moment sort of shake things up. Right. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is, again, it's a really jarring, awkward situation. Like, think about your circumstance. It was a very clear right and wrong, and it was still really hard, right? Yeah. I mean, it's as clear right and wrong as it gets, and it was still really hard for you. Yeah. And it required courage. It required high risk. And also you had to de-escalate the situation. And that's why when I talk to companies and organizations about bystander training, which is one of the key areas I focus on, I say, listen, 1 hour of training will make a huge difference on how you can confront, de-escalate, and pivot from a circumstance, distract the person so that no one gets hurt. Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which I hope we can put in the show notes, has a great training. I encourage everyone to look at. So it's a little bit of just education. There's a gap in education, just like how there's a gap in advocating for yourself in salary negotiations, or advocating for yourself to make your point across in a pivotal meeting with your boss, right? There's a need for education to manage up. Yep. There's an education that's needed to manage down. Like, these things don't just happen. It's through life experience and hopefully learning from other people that you actually respect and connect to, rather than just some piece of paper that tells you A, B, C, D, E in your HR manual, right? We need to move away from the manual life and move to actually connecting with real people, real advocates, real champions that we can learn from. And, Dave, your experience, I think, highlights that to me. It's, listen, like, there at some point you kind of just impromptu need to do something, but there is probably a tried and true method in making sure you can help this kid out without getting your ass kicked.
Right. Thank God I got out of it. And I want to try to tie your political background with your professional background. And my guess is your background with politics and public policy, really that's like military training, first. Now you go into a company, it's like, oh, I've already been to war. I can deal with it. I would think it's making it easier for you. Am I wrong?
Well, I think the big thing going from politics to, politics and public service to the private sector, I think the biggest thing it teaches you is the ability to work through multiple systems. Yeah. And to understand, you have different interest groups, right? And that might be internal, right? Your product people might have a different lens. Your engineering people have a different perspective. Your sales people definitely have a different angle, right? And I will tell you, like, representing a company to the public, you're representing the team, right? The hardest conversations are internal, not external. It's getting everyone on the same sheet of music as a conductor, right? That's your job, is to educate the business on the opportunities, the risk, and also doing the right thing for your consumers, your stakeholders, or the public in general. Yeah. Getting people to understand that you need to be aligned there. So there can't be misalignment, can't be daylight, but also understanding the process, the people, and the politics of a situation. I mean, I think that's the case in anything you do, whether that's the little league team you're coaching, or to the company you're leading, to the nonprofit board you're sitting on. I don't think there's very much difference. I think the ability to roll and translate multiple languages, like when you're talking to engineering folks, it's a very different conversation. It's a different way of learning, right? I cannot tell you how many times I've spent drawing on a napkin what I'm trying to say, or something, right? Or I'll make analogies with politicians, on different singers or songwriters. I've done this so they understand the mood of a situation. Yep. You got to meet people where they are, Dave.
Yep.
And most people want to do the right thing. They just need to know how and where to get that resource. That's the game, right? At the end of the day, I do believe that most people want to do the right thing. They just haven't had that exposure before. And in my space as an Asian American, most folks don't even know that Asian Americans have these issues.
Right.
I mean, right, that Asian Americans are the least likely to make partner at a law firm, even though they are one of the highest proportional groups as associates, right? Or they're one of the least likely groups to make it to the C-suite, even if they make up the middle ranks. Like these are things that people connect. Or even this concept that Asian Americans is a group, which, by the way, 50 nationalities, 100 languages, right? Let's just say. And we just lumped them together as 7% of the country, which is also crazy. Yeah. But then the point is this, right? And I just want to highlight this, is so important. When you put all the folks together, yes, the numbers say there's a higher education rate, college graduate rate, there's higher access to healthcare, there's probably a higher standing in other parts of life. That's probably true. When you disaggregate the information, so when you split it up to different particular communities, whether it's a Vietnamese American community or a Hmong community, wherever group, you'll find some of those groups, they have lower life expectancies, higher experiences in the criminal justice system, higher experiences of alcoholism, higher death rates and lower life expectancies, lower high school and college graduation rates than other communities that you would probably picture. It's just so important to tell that story, because here's the thing: the Asian American history here, goes to like the 1840s, 50s, right? So Japanese, Chinese folks who came here, right, building railroads, starting businesses. By the way, some of them have been here longer than Irish Americans, Polish Americans, German Americans. But guess what? When Japanese internment showed up, there wasn't German internment or Italian internment. You know what I mean? It's important to note. It's important to note. And my parents, right? I mean, they're both people from 1975. So their history is very different than the folks who came here at the beginning of the 20th century. Like I always like to say, our Ellis Islands are a little different.
Yeah. I know you weren't born. I hate to interrupt, but I know you weren't born. But when your parents came over in 1975, which is the year Vietnam ended.
Yeah, well, they were in refugee camps in Thailand and the Philippines for 6 years before they married. So 1981 is when they married.
Still 6 years. I mean, it's fresh. The wound is still fresh. Yep. Were they scared coming here? They must have been
terrified. My parents speak. Vietnam is was a post-colonial French colony. So you have to understand their French was better than their English. And can I tell you? I mean, you think going to the DMV sucks for you and me? My parents that was one of their first experiences, trying to navigate the DMV, like fresh off the boat, literally fresh off the boat, was trying to figure out how to navigate American bureaucracy, how to get your assistance, how to get that, and also to do it in a way with privilege and gratitude, right? Because style points are everything.
Right.
No, they were terrified. But when people ask me like who's my heroes, I always think my parents are some of the bravest people I know, because they came here with zero. And more importantly, Dave, they lost everything. I mean, their farm got collectivized by the communist regime. That sucked. So you can imagine they had a little distrust of government, but also they lost their country and their identity. So when they came here and took on the American mantle, it was something they were so proud of. And so I want you to fast forward, right, 40 years later, my parents are on the phone trying to tell me without quivering that their neighbors don't actually think they deserve to be here. It was so crushing, which then that experience forced me to write about my experiences and also to write about the experiences of what immigrants are contributing in this sort of COVID-19 time, not only as, small business owners, right, trying to support the economy, or the, essential workers that we talked about, they're bagging your groceries. They're all coming from these communities because it's a privilege for them to be here. Yeah. And they don't say anything, right? They just want to do the work. They want to put their head down. And what they needed was a voice. And so I remember writing about my parents' experience and went in the local paper, and it was the first time I've ever written anything in public, because in politics, you're kind of taught to avoid the media at all costs, right? And I mean, that was what you isolate yourself on purpose, right? Because you don't want to deal with scrutiny and you don't deal with drama. That's the conventional wisdom. It's a little silly, but there's truth to it. Mm-hmm. And I remember the piece came out and two things happened. Number one, a lot of people read it locally. It's a paper of about 30,000. So not small, not big for local. A lot of people read it. It was on a Sunday. And then the second thing is the neighbors called and apologized to my parents. So there was this recognition that if you speak with passion, with clarity, and you help people understand like your perspective in a way that's thoughtful and connected to reason and doesn't assume anything ill about someone else, you really can make a difference. And that's why I'm speaking to you today. And that's why I'm speaking to your audience today, is because we need to meet people where they are and go to where they are. That's the only way we can effectuate change. And ideally from this conversation, someone takes one nugget that says, oh, I don't want to be an asshole about this, or I'm going to give this person a chance. Whatever that's going to be, we're going to work on that. That's why we're having this discussion today. I
agree. I think that your path is a tough path because one, the whole media thing. I mean, it's like, I know there's risk. I want to avoid it, but if I don't say anything, then I'm not accomplishing anything. So it's a path that can easily be distorted. People can pull out your sound bites or your phrases and turn it into whatever they want, and then make it whatever they want. So there's that, and then the political path, another bitch of a path. I mean, God, it's so complicated and snarly, and you did that too. It's like those are the two toughest paths: leveraging the media, leveraging politics for change. I mean, aren't they working against each other or against you at times?
Oh, they're totally working against you at times, but you have to have faith in your ability. And it isn't just one person doing this, right? It takes a village, right? There's amazing people in my life. There's incredible editors that wanted to hear these voices. There are policymakers that really care about these topics. There are CEOs that really want to push on this agenda. Like, if the pandemic has taught us anything, Dave, is that the price of doing business the way we used to do, it's over.
Yeah.
And we need to transform the way we do things. That's the one thing everyone keeps talking about, is transformation. Well, I think the transformation of ensuring that people are armed with tools to be better human beings and to recognize that your experience is different than someone else's. Is that too hard to ask?
No.
Is that too hard to ask?
No, this is going to be off topic, and I got to say it. I was just thinking about, the price of doing business, the way of doing business has changed so much.
Yeah.
I've got 3 kids. I've mentioned this 1,000 times on these podcasts, but my youngest is 13, and she and her friends help out working at this place in town, a hockey rink in town, and they came home yesterday ecstatic, like she just won the lottery, and in 3 hours she made like $75.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you make $25 an hour and you're 13 years old for pouring Diet Cokes and handing out pretzels. There are nurses in this country not even making $20 an hour to wipe someone's ass. Pardon my French. There are so many jobs that require people to just give away their time, burning them out, grinding them down, that don't pay anything. But you can go and pour a drink and get tips for that. There's just something so broken about that. I don't know why that just popped into my head.
Well, it's because you're talking about the difference between essential work and essential pay.
Yeah.
And what we value as a society, right? When you think of, how important are school teachers these days, when your kids have to go on the stupid Zoom to learn about something.
Yeah.
And your kids are people. Imagine if it's like a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, what that means, right? I've got a 19-month-old. When she misses out on school, she misses out on a lot of things, right? For her growth and development, right? And we pay, by the way, daycare workers $12, $13 an hour max.
Yeah.
Max.
Yeah.
They should, I mean, school teachers, what do we pay? Like $30,000 a year?
Some, yeah.
It's obscene.
Right.
And you know, I'm a big sports guy. We talked about baseball. I love baseball. Guaranteed contracts in the millions a year.
Yeah.
To hit a round ball with a round bat, which not easy, but doesn't seem as essential as, I don't know, the fabric of educating our kids or giving the support to families so you and I can work without worry.
Yeah.
So we can contribute to society.
Right.
Isn't that kind of upside down? And imagine, by the way, the teachers, the daycares, disproportionately women.
Yep.
So it's women that are earning less for the work we're supposed to value more.
Yep.
What does that say about us?
It's disgusting. It's shallow, you know, but you know, I had a conversation with, I run a CEO group. We meet once a month and I coach a bunch of them too, but we were talking about just the workforce in general and, you know, how challenging it is to find good people, in quotes. Yeah. But I get it if you do it in the traditional way. I'm curious to get your take on this, but I'm speaking from experience. I think there's a massive opportunity to re-engage retirees that have a tremendous amount to give, tremendous amount of energy and knowledge and desire to still contribute in a different capacity. Maybe it's part-time, et cetera. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to engage. You talk about women re-entering the workforce, say after having children, my wife being one of them. And I know a ton of stay-at-home moms, for example, who lost the belief that they still had something to give professionally because they had taken time off, only to re-enter and explode and just realize, man, like my project management skills, my people skills, my conflict management skills are through the roof and they're thriving right now. But there are plenty that don't believe that, or, you know, so the reason I bring those things up is I think to myself, I mean, this is an ignorant comment, but I would have felt inferior to you as a student in school. I would have automatically assumed Jeff is smarter than I am.
Hardly. I don't think so. We would have got along fine, by the way. We would have played ball and hung out. I think it's the case that it's about projections, right? It's like, what do you project? And I'm sure when you talk with your clients, the aura, how you say something is so much more important than what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the best pieces of advice that, you know, one of my former chiefs of staff had for me was, we had this really intense meeting, but I wasn't saying very much. And after the meeting, she went up to me and she said, you know, I'm really smart, but I can't read your mind. When the time comes, you do need to say something.
Right.
Because sometimes you need to say the thing that no one wants to say.
Right.
And it's a great reminder to me that in the meeting, when you're in the meeting, when you're all around the table, you're all there for a reason. Let's just say it's a kabuki dance. Let's just say it's a sham thing. You still have to say it because you got to think long game. Right. It's also the case of the respect from your peers to understand where you stand on the topic. Right. Again, we were talking about earlier about change management, about, you know, the external stuff is okay. Actually, it's not the end of the world. The internal stuff is the game. That stuff is so hard. And whether that's the military, whether it's a government, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's in philanthropy, I mean, the internal alignment efforts, so critical so that you can all project with one voice together.
Yeah.
So then you can be clear about what your goals are. That is really quite important. And, you know, I mean, to the point you raised about difference, we need to be like, you were talking about your CEO colleagues about how they're looking for quote unquote good people. There are tons of good people. It's just their lens of what is good, what their perception of good needs to change. It's, you know, I'll tell you this. I've definitely been in interviews where people will tell me, you know, you're really great, but you know, I just don't know if you have leadership skills. Or it's like, you know, or, you know, I really like, you know, but you have too much energy. Or, you know, you're not energetic enough. You know what it is? They just don't want me.
Yeah.
That's the truth. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay, you know, because a place that doesn't want you is not the place for you. You don't want to be going to a place where people think you're less than your value.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think though also, Jeff, that, and I've been around a long time, you've been around a long time. I'm smart enough to know, and I think you're smart enough to know when you bring it to the table and you understand your value and you haven't allowed anyone else to chip away at it. Maybe that's my white privilege coming out. I'm not letting anyone tell me anything. I already know my deficiencies.
I think it's the masshole in you.
Maybe it is. But like I know where I'm short. Like I know where I fall down. I get it. And I'm like the first one to say, yeah, you got me. But I still have a voice here, but maybe that's the advantage I have over some that don't feel like they can say something.
I see.
But what I guess what I'm oh, you had made a comment. Now I'm off my I got off track there with what you just said, but I just feel in the end, people, that you have to believe in yourself first. You have to believe that I have something to say and I'm willing to deal with what comes back at me, even if it's anger. And so, a lot of the work I do is helping people, one is don't decide. I interviewed a guy about a year ago, Barry Moline. There's just under a year ago. And he has this whole concept of always assume positive intent. Mm-hmm. And if you assume that the other person is coming from a good place, even if they're disagreeing or they, whatever, if I assume you're a good dude and you mean well, I'll work with you. And I think what happens to a lot of people is they assume the opposite. I might assume you don't like me because I'm white, or I might assume you don't like me because I'm a man, or, you don't like me because I'm gay, or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden conversation over because I've already decided that in you. So how much of your effectiveness hinges on your ability to say, I'm good with me, and now I can be open to you?
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think one of the hardest things on this journey over the last 2 years for me has been a recognition that you have to bet on yourself first.
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest bet to make. I mean, I've spent my entire life trying to champion, support, work for others. Yeah. I mean, I've tried to be as much of a servant as I can be, right? Whether that's mowing lawns or advising the governor. I think when I made that change to saying, you know what, no, I'm worthy. I am worthy. That was one of the hardest steps I ever took. And it's jokingly one of the first things I talk about when I talk to political candidates for the first time or CEOs for the first time. It's like, listen, it's totally okay to have imposter syndrome. It's totally okay not to know everything. What people want is an honest, empathetic leader with a vision for something special. That's what they want. Everything else is just details.
Yep.
The details we'll figure out. Right. What do you want? What is your voice? Why you? Why now? And that's what I try to tease out with, candidates who are looking for office or folks who are becoming chairs of nonprofit boards for the first time. Because, there is that uncertainty, and it's totally understandable in leadership, right? There's always this learning curve challenge, right? Where your leadership skills are a certain degree and the opportunity comes, and the opportunity is sometimes bigger than your skills in the moment. But there's this belief that you will grow into the job.
Right.
I mean, first year manager versus 20th year manager for a ball club, probably a different skill set, right?
Right. Yeah.
But you have the advantage of fresh eyes. You have the advantage of, an infectious energy. You can probably relate to your players more. There are unique advantages. You don't have to be some graybeard. They're intangibles. What are your intangibles? If you were to talk to your 5 closest friends in your life, what do they say is special about you?
Yep.
And what I've learned is this: we suck at self-promotion, especially Asians, but particularly empathetic servant leaders, I think, just are terrible at self-promotion. So I usually talk to their spouses. I talk to their friends. I talk to their loved ones. I talk to their coworkers that don't love them. And they still usually say the same 3 or 4 or 5 things.
Yep.
So that's like the special sauce. That's what it's about. But to really garner that, you need to sort of give yourself that breakthrough moment of, you know what, I'm worthy. I'm betting on myself. If I don't bet on myself, no one else will. I need to do this for me so I can do this for others.
You make a great point. When I train salespeople, I work with CEOs, and that's ultimately what you have to get them beyond is some of them feel like I don't want to self-promote. I don't want to brag. I don't want to make it about me. And I don't know what to say. I don't know if people are going to like that. I say the same thing you said. Go to the people that know you the best and ask them specifically, what is unique about you? Why do they hang out with you? Why do they buy from you? Why do they like you? Why do they keep coming back to you? What is it? Forget about your damn business and your products and your services and all that junk. What is it about you? And so in that way, if you're not a self-promoter, you can still with humility and self-deprecation say, look, I don't know. I can just tell you what other people say. That's what they see. And apparently it's working, but that's what they tell me. And that way it's not your words pounding your own drum. What's your take? Do you go down that path at all?
Well, first off, I mean, we talk about surrogacy all the time, right? Like who is your best spokesperson? Because generally speaking, people are way more likely to trust other people talking about you than you talking about you, right? Whether that's in politics or others. That's why, right, when you have presidential candidates, you have their spouses talk about them, or their school teachers talking about them, right? Or the firefighter talking about them, because those audiences are trusted in different ways, right? Yeah. And what you're talking about is validation. Who else can vouch for you, validate for you? That's the key, because the idea being, if all sorts of random people validate for you, you are truly a good person, right? And that this notion that your CEO friends might say, which is like, oh, I don't know. It's hard to find good people. That's not true. You just have to talk to the right validators at the end of the day, and put your bias aside. Just because the person doesn't look like a Major League Baseball player doesn't mean they can't hit a ball.
I'm one of the coach, and I drive people crazy with my kids' analogies. It drives people crazy, but I'm a coach on one of the coaches for my daughter's basketball team, and I've done podcasts on this before. But there's nothing more satisfying than seeing a young kid who doesn't believe in themselves yet, and then you see something in them that they might not see, and then you tell them about it. And I've seen a few over the years where maybe the coordination isn't there, or maybe the leadership isn't there because they're not vocal, but the work ethic is phenomenal, or the coachability is phenomenal. And I've seen some of these kids just grow exponentially by telling them, do you know that you work harder than anybody else on this team? Or do you know that you listen better than anybody else on this team? And then as they find confidence in those things, and then you can build on them. And then I see them, a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, and they're just a different person, and they're received differently by their teammates. One of the things that I forgot I wanted to ask, and I got off track, there's two things coming to my mind as you're talking. One is how you talk about culture and values. You referenced that before we started recording, and what you think they are, because what we're told they are, whether it's in the United States, this is who we are. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, that's what we say we are, but is it the same thing in a company? Well, this is who we are. This is our mission, and these are our values. And then you get in, it's like, that's what we say we are. Yeah. But is it who we are? And how much does that stifle voices when what we say and what we do are inconsistent? If the hypocrisy there.
Yeah, I mean, is your business values more than just a bumper sticker?
Right.
This is what I've learned, is that people want to work at a place or be a part of a club or an organization where folks are brutally authentic. And if they smell any sort of disingenuousness, it'll tune them right out. If you really want to kill a culture, or if you want to have people leave in mass or not have a connection to the mission of an organization, just be complete hypocrites. I think that's probably a great way to do it. If the leadership is not leading with their values and putting those things above everything else, I think it's very hard to create an inclusive environment. Let's say we're talking about, we're forward leaning on these issues and this and that, and you have a community of people that are all from the same place, all from the same school, all from the same lived experience. You know what that is, Dave? It's groupthink. You know what that does? Kills an organization.
Right.
I try to, one of the first things I talk about with leaders at companies and organizations, I tell them the one thing that will kill your company quickest will be a lot of yes people.
Yeah.
The organizations that don't have what's the word? If there isn't strife and debate, I mean, intellectual strife. I'm not talking
Yeah.
I'm talking like the intellectual debate on a topic, right? The sort of the the violent disagreement, but then the commit to whatever the plan is after.
It feels like exercise. It actually feels like exercise.
Totally. That will kill an organization. And one of the best ways to encourage groupthink and to increase your blind spots, is to not be inclusive or diverse in your thinking of who is considered good.
Yep.
In terms of skills that you need, in terms of accepting and taking critique and making adjustments. If you're not doing those things, there isn't thoughtful cultural training for managers, if there isn't real mentorship and sponsorship or a culture of thinking of others, organization's going to die. What does it take? I think about that all the time. And that's how I have to coach these issues. I'm sure you talk about that too with your CEOs. It's, you need to get them to hear everyone's incentivized differently on what it takes to get to there, but everyone needs to get there.
It turns my stomach is how money shuts people up. I hate that. I hate that, I think the people that I struggle with the most are those that don't say anything. And sometimes it's not because they're vulnerable. It's not because they're marginalized. It's because I'm not giving up this. So I'm just going to let that be. I
gravy train.
Oh,
gravy train.
It's nauseating. It's nauseating. And we've got a lot of ignorant executives out there that act as if it's not a problem. No one's complaining.
Because everyone's getting theirs. Everyone's getting theirs. That's why.
And how often, and I've seen this a ton, where plenty of opinions on the in the side conference room, plenty of opinions at the bar after work, zero opinions and zero challenges in the boardroom.
Yeah,
because they don't want to. And I just don't have any respect for that. I think you know what? Walk away from what makes you feel comfortable. Walk away from that paycheck. I know you have kids. I know you have a wife who stays at home. Walk away from it.
Just keep enjoying your Kool-Aid, right? I think that's the case there. It's tough. Again, to the point of speaking up and rocking the boat, the point you're talking about, Dave, people are less likely to want to rock the boat if they think they're going to get fired over it. Right. So to the point you and I were just talking about, the importance of banter, debate, dialogue, discussion, critical thinking, right? Those things are essential for an organization. If people view that as insubordination, or they view that as undermining their leadership, that's a bad culture, right? So anything that stifles true debate, that is a place you should leave. But it's also ruled by fear. And so I understand why people stick it out in these places, because they are thinking about being a good provider, being a good spouse, the mortgage payments, the 529 for their kids. I get that. But to the point you raise, if you really are betting on yourself, you will find a home that is a much better fit for you. And as a leader, you owe it to yourself to find the opportunities where you can do, again, the most good for the most people.
Yes. I want to tie this into a question that I wrote down. You had asked me the first time we talked, but I get supporting the family. I'm in that situation as well. I get wife, kids, 529, all that stuff. I get that, but at what expense? At the cost of your self-respect, at the cost of your mental health, at the cost of your belief in yourself. I'm just shutting my mouth because I've got to pay these bills. That's that to me. I whatever. But let me ask you this. You had asked a question. Where did I put it? What are the biggest challenges in representation in politics, and what causes that disconnect between politicians and those elected them? I don't want to center this just on politics. I want a new manager that's promoted, a VP, a new CEO, whatever, right? What did you mean by that question? What is the biggest challenge? I've got my thoughts. I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, the first is role models, right? So if you don't have someone from your, let's say, your community who represents you, why would you ever think that would be something for you? Right? It's we talk about relation points, right? One of the most important things for forming bonds is having shared things in common. Right. People usually have shared things in common from life experiences, from a shared educational moment, from a love of certain sports or culture, right? The arts, those things matter. Well, if you love politics, let's just say, and you've never seen anyone look like you in those functions, doesn't that kind of imply that you don't fit into that? Not directly, but doesn't it kind of drop that seed of oh yeah, that's not for people like me? And I think it does indirectly. And when you think about who's leading these companies, Dave, right? I'm sure if you took a big quick survey of Fortune 500 companies, they probably look a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Like me, C students in college, middle-aged white males.
I'm not sure about that, but I just think that there's probably, you would think there'd be more dynamism there should be, right? But there isn't, right? And we were just talking about this earlier. You want folks with different life experience. I'll give you an example. When I worked at a major cloud computing company, one of the things that we were really proud of was recruiting non-traditional talent for cybersecurity roles. Because guess what? The best people in cybersecurity don't all just go to MIT. The best people who do cybersecurity, and this is both in government from my experience and in the private sector, were the kids who got into a lot of trouble, who spent a little time behind some bars for a bit, who got out, and they're incredible thinkers. They're so creative. They're so passionate. They're as non-traditional as you get. And they're exactly the type of person who doesn't just do things because of the way they were always doing things. They're the type that really challenge, and they want to reduce blind spots. And that's inclusive of women that we would hire in that space. I mean, the best professionals that I dealt with defensive issues in the hacking space were women who got into a lot of trouble. Those were the absolute best hackers in the world I ever worked with. And I always remind myself of that. And they came from all sorts of races and creeds and experiences. Guess what? Because they went to the school of hard knocks, and that place is way tougher than Cornell.
That's fascinating.
And
how did you figure that out? Just time and data? How did you figure it out?
When I was in the governor's office, I had some experiences with different nonprofit organizations that were working with folks who were returning from the criminal justice system, and they wanted some skilling. But they didn't need skills. You know what they needed was a chance. That's all they needed. And they needed the right place to help others understand what they could do. They just needed the chance. And so it was a part of a pairing of organizations. And again, in the governor's office, you're the facilitator.
Right.
Because what's an organization going to do, Dave? They're going to say no? Of course not. They say yes, because guess what? It's good for them. It's good for them to say yes. Yes is always better than no in this situation, right? You do a solid. You do the solid. It's the right thing to do. And it really helps you later. Yeah. And guess what? California gets hammered with bad news stuff, right? We have critical infrastructure. There's all these cyber attacks. Silicon Valley's there. I don't know, nuclear labs, other things. Stuff happens. There's a lot of what we call surface area. There's a lot of stuff that goes down. You need people with that creativity. And it's not just the folks who want to do bad. It's also the people who want to steal stuff. So intellectual property theft, you name it.
Yep.
You need people who can think a step ahead because they've gone down multiple paths that, again, some kid from the suburbs probably didn't experience. That is really important.
I think that's really creative. It's such outside the box thinking. I love it. I'll go back to the representation piece. Mm-hmm. Do get in though, and you don't look like anybody else, and you don't see anybody else that looks like you. But let's say you do. You still have a disconnect between the elected official, the manager, the VP, the CEO, the politician.
Yep.
And those they're responsible for, those that are counting on them. What would you say is? Would you say that most of them go in with the best intentions, with the desire to actually accomplish something? Is it that they confront something that they didn't expect to confront, and that's why they're letting down those they represent?
Yeah, I would say this. I think the folks who enter the arena in either public service or want to lead a company, they definitely are entering with the best intentions. I think what happens is you surround yourself with the political class or the C-suite class who sort of tell you like, hey, this is how it works. And it then isolates you from the real world in some ways. It keeps you in this echo chamber. And what happens is I think the policymakers in particular get caught up in things that are important but not essential for their electorate. And as a result of that, you sort of lose the touch. You lose that connection point, right? That's why it's so critical for policymakers to have real conversations with real people, right? When they go to town halls, so they can actually understand challenges on the ground. The sort of the question, right? Like, how much is the cost of milk? How much is the cost of gas? And if your policymaker, your elected official doesn't know that, they're out of touch. They're well out of touch, right? And I think in this time we live in, the prices are different than they were a year ago.
Oh my God.
And so I think that is what happens. You surround yourself, you get forced into a situation where you surround yourself with the wrong type of folks who they are just thinking about one thing, which is your reelection. And what you should be thinking about is, again, how can you do the most good for the most people in a finite amount of time? Because it's not your seat. It's the public seat. You're just keeping it warm. And ideally, you're using that seat to convene, like we talked about, and to put pressure on the status quo. I think that's the ideal circumstance, but people want to play it safe. People want to be around. They want to be back in the seats in 2 years.
Yeah. Once
they win, they're just focused on on getting there again in 2 years, rather than all the details in the middle. So I think it's very easy to get caught up into that. And it can make you put some of your genuineness aside, because you're thinking about your personal survival and success. And they rationalize it as this, Dave: if you're not in the chair, you can't do the good.
Right.
That's how they rationalize it. But if you're in the chair and you're not doing the good, what's the point?
What about term limits? What's your take on that?
Term limits sound really good. But the reality is that there are unintended consequences. So in California, we have term limits in the state legislature. Okay. And what happens is, yes, you get more folks coming in. That's good. Bad news. The folks who know the issues the best, the staff and the lobbyists. That's bad. Right. So, because think about it, right? In California, it's 12 years. They get 12 years in statewide elected offices for the legislature, but the staff can be there forever. And guess what? The third house, the lobbyists, they get to be there forever. And to no surprise, when you get there, the staff give you advice. Oh, they've been here 20 years, so they know. And the lobbyist has been here 30 years and they work for this person, that person, so they know.
Yeah.
And before you know it, 8 years in, you only have 4 years left. So then you have to start thinking about your next office. So it forces this like climbing culture.
Yeah.
Right. So there's unintended issues with that, with term limits. And my view is this: the public does know best. If they don't want someone in that chair, they'll vote him out. And that's on the public to make that decision.
Yep.
But I understand why people get frustrated by 15-term members. But the reality is they're voting for the 15-term members. So you should be frustrated at the electorate for making that decision versus taking a chance on someone new. And actually, it's not crazy uncommon for that to happen. It has happened in recent cycles. So I would say this, like, we should have more faith in the voter to make a decision that's best for their community than legislating it in, which then has these unintended consequences where someone in the chair suddenly can't do as much as they could do, especially with less time.
That's a good answer. Going back to the and I'll wrap it up because I'm going to abuse your time here, and I don't want to. I could keep going. When it comes to say working with an organization, oftentimes I'm called in at the executive level because somebody wants an outside coach,
a voice,
advisor, whatever. And the last thing I want is somebody that wants me to validate them at all. So the first, all I'm looking for is, who are you and what do you need to work on? And it's literally a relationship where they're constantly having to look in the mirror, making tough choices, and dealing with decisions that they, quite frankly, may have never dealt with, like moving somebody out or confront and eliminating all this stuff you and I are talking about. And that's how I decide whether or not I want to work with a company is, are you willing to deal with what's most difficult? And if you are, you're going to have an exponential ride. It's going to be unbelievable. But if you're not, I don't want to work with you. It's boring. I don't want the money just so you can pretend, whatever. So I can
check the box. So you have to check the box. Nope.
Zero interest. But I wonder if I'd love to see that politically too. I would love to see us just get down to, let's just cut the bullshit. And I think but there's a lot involved with that. But let me ask you this. I don't know how to complete this conversation because we've covered so much. How do we wrap it up? What message do you want to put out there? I'll let you have the last word just to tie us up.
Well, I would say this: if you are a leader of an organization, I would say this: if you want to make your environment more inclusive, particularly in light of hate with Asian Americans. Let's just say as an example, I have sort of a couple thoughts for you to consider, right? If you're the leader of an organization, I mean, first and foremost, in your personal capacity, in your leadership capacity, in your community leadership capacity, learn the history of this community, right? I tell everybody, if they can, to watch the PBS special on Asian Americans. We'll put it in the show notes. Mm-hmm. I promise you this, everyone will learn something new about it, including Asian Americans. It's a very extended, complex history. And usually when you picture Asian Americans coming here, it's usually because of some crisis, and then they're here. It's a little more complicated. The second thing, if you have an Asian American in your life in some way, or Pacific Islander in your life, ask them to share their family story. Their story is an American story, and it's the American dream. And I'm here with you because of the American dream, which is not the hopes that my parents will have a better life. It's the hopes that their children will have a better life. That's actually the American dream. My parents, they made the American payments. The dream is mine. That's a hard thing for people to hear, but it's the truth. You need to learn about the payment. That's the key. Leaders within organizations, I mean, cultural training, understanding that people come from different cultures, so they might speak differently, or they might have different cues and feeling welcome to make a point. You know, people learn differently. We talked about anti-racism training, you know, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Hollow Back, 1 hour of your time, well worth it. 360 assessments. I don't think that's crazy. You know, be transparent. And I think it'll help you have thicker skin. I think it's better for everybody. Promotions versus goals. I've had many experiences where friends in my life, they'll meet all their goals, but they'll never get promoted. So what does it actually take? Have that honest discussion. Are you ever going to be QB1 or not? You make all the throws. You do all what you're supposed to do. Are you ever going to be under center? Yes or no? I think you should have an honest conversation. Mentorship and sponsorship. Everyone listening here should think about how they can support someone, some young person. Because guess what? There's so much potential. They just need someone to see it. And they don't have your lived experience. That's the advantage of being old. We have more experiences. Yeah. We've taken some more punches in the face in life. Yeah. Helping them anticipate that will be the most rewarding thing you can do, regardless of race or creed. Whatever your connection point to that person is priceless. In Asian American businesses, you might recall during the pandemic, a lot of them were shuttered. Yes. Well, when businesses came back on, a lot of the PPP loans, this low interest or no interest loans that went to these businesses, a lot of the businesses spent the money on responding to vandalism. So if you want to support a small business, you should do it, because their margins are pretty limited. Otherwise, your local communities are going to go empty. Last thing, this is particularly the private sector. DEI councils, it's great. Pay the people on them. It's real work. It's not a surprise. LinkedIn does it. Pay them, and also give them bonuses for doing it. It's not crazy. And you should, here's a good one, Dave. You should link your diversity bonuses to your executive bonuses. And that will encourage a lot of people to actually do it. Last thing, and this is across the board, any support for childcare and senior care that will help women in the workforce who are disproportionately caretakers. Do it. If you're thinking about what will actually make people's lives way better, and also, frankly, promote company loyalty or organizational loyalty, I can't think of anything stronger than giving people the flexibility and the peace of mind to know their kids are cared for while they work for you. Those are a couple things I would just have your audience here just chew on. Yeah. If you're in a position to do it, I don't think it's crazy rocket science, but I do think these things will make a huge difference. And guess what? It might help you recruit and retain your talent rather than have to go through this great resignation and have to hire people constantly.
Good stuff, Jeff. I wish you had a little bit more passion for what you do. No, I'm joking. I really appreciate it. Very informative. I'd love to do another one of these. I mean, there's so much more we could cover. I'm like selfishly wanting to keep it going, but thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to talking to you at some point in the future.
Hey, the pleasure's on mine. Look forward to the drinks.
All right, great. Thank you.